So I'll give you a little bit more. Basically, the key factor here is that Alice would have to misrepresent what she knows to actually push him out. So the actual truth is quite neutral, but she'd have to present it as something that it wasn't really, to try to make him look unethical and force him out of the company.
What I'm saying is that if the truth was true, I mean, if the illegality of Tom's actions were true, then in that case, what should have been Alice's reaction? In case she didn't have to misrepresent, but only kind of squeal about it.
So it would have been another consideration in this process. But what's interesting here, I think, Rajiv, not to go too far down that path, but to just sort of respond to you, is that when you take a decision like that to, if you will, out somebody who's done something unethical, it depends what it is, of course, or illegal. It depends what it is, but it has a big impact on the messenger and the career of the messenger, usually. So that's another aspect to take into consideration. You know, whistleblowers usually can't stay in the companies where they've blown the whistle, even if what they're doing is morally correct. But I have to say, that is really a whole other course on business ethics, which we don't have time for today, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I know. It's a very difficult thing, because it defeats the whole concept of whistleblowing when we say that. It is true that whistleblowers don't get, they don't realize any benefits of doing whistleblowing. But
Exactly.
then that check and balance is lost out if you don't allow that.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm going to just make one point about this, the importance of strategy. If you had not done Alice to Bill, Bill to Craig, Craig to Tom, and you went instead to what is the knee-jerk reaction of Alice goes to Owen, Owen's going to have a bad reaction. He's going to probably go to the CEO immediately and say, listen, I didn't trust this woman before, but listen to what she's saying now. She's telling me she doesn't want the CEO job. That's totally unbelievable. Get rid of her. Forget about Chromium. Whatever you did after that, it doesn't matter, because he's already gone to the top and destroyed your chances. So following that line of strategy is really crucial. Part of what Joel found was that almost everybody has the basic skills of strategic influencing, but what he found was that almost nobody uses them. So now we're going to look at Joel's actual research, and he was looking at what stops people from engaging in strategic influencing, especially if part of what he found was not that many people do use the skills. So he was very curious about why wouldn't they use these skills, because clearly they help your career. Why not use them? This is directly from Joel's research. And what he found was that 65 to 80% of people know how to do this, but don't do it. He called them the idealists, and his research showed that they have lower impact on the organizations, and as a result, their careers move slower. The people who are engaged in it are, on the right-hand side, 20% approximately of every organization that he worked with. He called these people the pragmatists. And as you can see, there's a kind of red bubble and a green bubble. And the red is 15% in what he called mocks, or Machiavellians, and only a 5% the savvy. And essentially these two, the red correlates to the fox and the green savvy correlates to the wise owl. He was an Italian living at the time when Italy was lots of warring states. He was basically a kind of consultant of the day who was essentially saying to senior people, I can help you retain the power and control that you have and increase it. And here's how I would do it. So he wrote a letter to one of the ruling families of the day in Italy, which has subsequently been turned into a book called The Prince. So that's where you got The Prince from, because he was trying to convince this prince to hire him as a consultant to help actually extend the power and influence of this prince. So he's famous for being amoral, which means that he's not really taking morality into consideration. He's not moral, he's not unmoral, he's basically not thinking about that part of it all and kind of advising. So he's got a negative connotation around him as a result, Vishesh. And he is equivalent to really to the fox. He was basically this is how Joel referred to the foxes, as mox. And you'll see that 5% wise owls, or the savvy, as Joel called them, 5% of the organizations, it's a tiny portion. And so this is where we go back to the kind of Baddeley and James model in our heads and think, this is the population, because they have a higher impact on their organizations. These are the ones who become the leaders of most organizations. And there is that 3-to-1 ratio of Machiavellian or fox-like versus the savvy owls. So you have in leadership roles, on average, about 3/4 of them, 75% of them, are the foxes, and only about 25% are the owls. So this is a really interesting thing to think about, because it means the owls have to understand the foxes because they're surrounded by them. They have to work with those people. They're often in peer roles, sometimes in boss roles. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? So what Joel found in his research was that there were two things that actually stop people from moving from the left to the right. In other words, becoming active in strategic influencing. The first that I'm going to talk about is the moral block. So it's the kind of idea that you look over that brick wall and what do you see? Mostly foxes, Machiavellians. And you think to yourself, I have a strong moral compass. I'm an ethical person, and I don't want to compromise that. So I only see people doing this. It's very easy to not see the 5%. To not realize that you can do it in an ethical way. And so they don't want to come anywhere near it, which is why I get pushback on people who actually have been forced to take this course. The second of the two is the rational block. And Joel himself was a scientist by nature and by training. And he had this himself, the kind of idea that I shouldn't have to engage in strategic influencing. The quality of my work is really good, and it should speak for itself. So, let me just ask the group, any of you kind of identify with that, the rational block? Sanchi does. Let's think about that one. What's the meaning of that? What does that actually mean? So let's think about a rational world. If you have a normal hierarchy in, a normal kind of large company, you'll have the CEO at the top of that organization, and then maybe a managing director, direct reports, or multiple. Sometimes they have 4 or 5 or 6 direct reports, and then you have people kind of going down in through the organization. So let me ask you the question, who has the most influence in a rational company? Who would have the most influence on the CEO's opinion?
The MD.
The MD, and why would you suggest that?
I think that is the chain of command becomes primary here, and nothing can move up the chain without passing through the MD. So all power will get concentrated into the top here and then use it to influence the CEO.
So in a rational world, the people who are direct reports, you would expect them to have the most influence on the CEO. But if we now think about this in a different way, and we start to think about, one of the companies that is, let's say, one of the big family-owned Indian companies, where you have, let's say, relatives. If you're the CEO and you're a part of that ruling family, you have relatives in all parts of the organization. So think about whichever company you want to, where there are relatives, there are friends of yours that are in the company, okay? And now you start to think, would those people have an influence on the CEO? And if so, how, when?
I think it also takes into consideration the scope of the decision to be made primarily. If it is a company-wide decision, then no single person would influence, in an individual way. But if there are sections of operations where one relative or one person deals with that, and he exercises influence in his area of operations, then he would bypass the chain and get the CEO to agree to what he wants to do. It also depends on the level of decentralization that exists within the company.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on that, Rajiv, by saying, okay, let's imagine the lives of these family members. They're meeting the CEO at maybe when they go to religious festivals. They might be meeting at birthdays or other family events. They're meeting quite regularly, maybe multiple times a month in informal settings where they can take the CEO aside and say, hey, there's a problem in my part of the business and my boss is doing this. And have you heard that so-and-so is actually doing some unethical things? They take the CEO aside in these private settings, in these settings which for them are, a normal part of their lives, and actually have a quiet word. Equally, in a place like the UK and sometimes in India as well, you may have gone to boarding school with the CEO and you have very close friendships that have become almost like family type relationships during your teens. Rajiv, I know you have a military background. People from military heritage are often very close because they've lived in situations where they have to rely upon each other for their lives to be saved. So these bonds are very tight. And maybe those kind of brothers in arms or close friends meet on a regular basis, even if it's once a month for a golfing day or something like that, where they have a whole day of informal time to actually influence the CEO on things. So these are kind of human chains of trust, which are basically non-rational, if you will, but actually have massive implications on how the CEO is thinking about individuals and possibly even ideas. So this is an important thing to consider, is where are the human bonds of trust? What are those lines of trust? How do they map into the situation that you're in? Now, let me stop there and say, do you guys have any questions or pushback on that?
What you're saying is absolutely correct, and that's the reality that beyond the structure, there is a different mapping of trust levels. And in fact, I think that when you talk of the old school bonding and other things, it puts a CEO or a decision maker into much more of a dilemma where favor is asked for, which may not be actually good for the organization. But yet he has to kind of keep up with that bond. So it puts ethical dilemma in the decision makers,
Indeed. And, this can happen at all sorts of levels. I mean, I actually was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago who is working very closely with the Prime Minister of this country, Boris Johnson, and where there have been rumors for many months that Boris Johnson's wife, Carrie, has a lot of influence over his decision-making. Now, she's not an elected official. She's not even hired to do that job, but that's the reality on the ground in, modern day London. So she's not on the org chart. Let's put it that way, right?
Yeah.
And yet her opinions carry very heavy weight. So it's, she has a chance to have one-to-one informal high trust conversations with the Prime Minister. Okay, so let's move forward, Akash. So the course today is trying to unblock, take those barriers away and free you up to start engaging more in strategic influencing. And of course, we are teaching that green, savvy, OWL path. But it's always up to you to choose, but that's the one we're choosing to teach. Let's go forward from here. And forward again. So part of what Joel discerned was that those who are savvy are ethical, well-liked, and continuously able to make an impact, but they weren't different in the kind of psychometrics that he gave people in 1974 in terms of personality, intelligence, or in terms of their interpersonal skills. The big difference between the savvy and the others was that they had 3 times the networks. Now, if you think about this, if you have really strong networks, you can get all the data that you need to create a really good strategy quickly. So you can call up a friend and say, hey, does Sanchi actually trust Vishesh? You can write to another friend and say, what does Rajiv actually care about? And you can get all the data that you actually need quickly if you've got a big network and a strong network. So that's a really interesting thing to think about because it's a kind of critical aspect of success. And the final point there is that they consistently took small risks. So yes, of course, you have to take a risk. If Alice goes to Bill and says, will you please give up tensile strength project, he could say no. So there's a risk of him saying no, but what they're trying to do all the time is reduce the risk. And they reduce the risk by having A, strong trust relationships, B, think carefully about what is this person going to get out of aligning with me? What are the benefits to that individual? And get that alignment with the individual as well. So those are critical aspects of reducing risk. But as a result, these people enjoy 3 times the odds of a successful innovation attempt. And that was a really big thing for Joel because he was an innovator. Significantly higher performance ratings, 2 times the promotion rates and 3 times the bonus rates, 3 times more likely to have higher job and life satisfaction and more likely to be viewed as leaders. So the benefits of strategic influencing in an ethical way are very significant. Next slide, please. And we're going to move forward through this. Joel's definition of political savvy was ethically building a critical mass of support for an idea you care about. So some people ask me, do I have to do this for every single thing, Liz? No. But if there's an idea you really care about, then it's going to behoove you to do the strategic planning and then do the strategic influencing to be able to boost your chances of success to get what it is that you're trying to do. Okay, now we're going to have a little quiz, and I'm going to actually take myself out of the equation so that it's Vishesh, Rajiv, Sanchi. We're going to have 4 savvy strategies. We're going to look at each one separately, individually, and finish one before we move on to the next. And basically, there's a question and then 4 potential answers. And Sanchi, I'm going to ask you to read through the questions and the potential answers out loud. And then I want you as a group to discuss which one you think the savvy would choose as the answer. And I'm going to just give you a little warning before we move to the next slide, which is Joel liked to add what he called danger words. These are words in the question or the answer that increase risk. So be on the lookout for this. Savvy strategy 1. So Sanchi, over to you.
So the first savvy strategy is as follows, and we have to choose a option, and we could choose multiple if we can't find one. Let's see.
So I think possibly it would be B.
I would choose Delta D. Primarily, you're interested in, discussing with people who will influence the decision. That the word influence is critical here. We are talking of influencing the decision.
Before I kind of sort of give you the politically savvy answer, what I want to do is to ask you to look at the question itself, because there is a danger word, one that increases risk in the question itself. What is that word? Yeah.
Building support.
A new
Something
idea.
new idea.
Yeah, a new idea is harder to get support for than one that's been kicking around for a while or is incremental. Yeah, so it's a bit risky, this situation. But then as we looked in kind of A, B, C, and D, and you've kind of said no to A, B, and C. So let's look at those. Sanchi, you had sort of talked about, and there's 2 things that I want you to keep in your minds here in terms of the debrief. 2 learnings, really. The first is, who's the target population for your influencing? And the second is, how are you doing that influencing? Okay, so if we look at the target, A is completely untargeted, right? It's like a scattergun approach. You're just sort of randomly going out to people. So that's not what the savvy would do. The second one actually has some danger words in it. And I want you to put danger words and phrases and tell me what they are. So in this particular case, the word official is going to increase the risk for you. Yeah, it's going to make this a riskier situation. And the other thing that's going to be really risky is the key decision makers. If you go straight to the key decision makers and they like your idea, fantastic. If they don't like your idea, it's going to be very difficult to go back to them again. So it's a high risk binary thing to actually go directly to the key decision makers. So what we're getting in B is the way you do it, which is official, which is dangerous, and the target group, key decision makers, very dangerous to go to them directly. So let's look at the third C and talk me through what's dangerous about this. There are 2 danger words in here. One is the target group and one is the how.
So formally, the superiors is the same thing as B.
In what way?
And Yeah, and then they are not decision makers, basically.
We don't know if they are. But superiors, which is a specific target group, are often a higher risk group than peers or direct reports. But the other thing is the how, right? So formally
I think
is going to be higher risk than informal. Does that
right.
make sense?
Maybe
Yeah.
also maybe it's a different kind of approach with different people in the same organization over an idea. Is it also for this?
Not so much, but it's more that you want to work informally with everybody, not formally.
Right.
And so the politically savvy have agreed completely with all three of you that they would choose D, because it's informal in the way that you're doing it, and the group you're choosing is the influencers of the key decision makers. So these are people who are like not in the middle of the bullseye, but one layer out. They know a lot about the key decision makers, and they can tell you stuff about what's motivating this one, and so on. That's going to inform the way that you influence those people. And they're going to be able to kind of give you clarity about he's not going to react well to that slide because he's interested in this. And so it'll help you hone your approach when you get to the key decision makers. And they'll also be able to influence on your behalf. So they completely agree with you. Oh, that's great. So I'll walk through these. So Joel basically found from the people that he interviewed that they were systematic in the way that they walked through the strategy, but they were informal in the way that they did the influencing. So they made the strategy and then they walked through it systematically, but always influencing informally. They used that 51% guide. They did exactly what you talked about, Rajiv, of linking agendas. What's the next one? They follow the path of credibility, which is another way of talking about they follow the line of trust, and they get people who trust each other to do the influencing. They definitely use interpersonal diplomacy, but they didn't have to be the level of, UN diplomats. And all companies have group meetings to make these big decisions about strategy, budgets, and so on. But they do the influencing before they get to those groups. And finally, they use the plan act approach. So they make the plan and they finalize the plan before they actually take action. They don't just do it like off the cuff. They bump into somebody that they know have to influence in the hallway and then just say, oh, can I have 5 minutes, Sanchi? No, they do the strategy first and understand what's the order in which you do things, because that's so critical to getting everything done successfully. Great. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And so now we're going to look at the mapping tools, and then we're going to pair up and do a little bit of work together in pairs using the tools. Alice went to Bill first, then Bill went to Craig second, and then Craig went to Tom third. And someone's going to have to go to Owen next, but we don't know which one until we find out who's got better trust with him, Tom or Craig. Okay, any questions about this before we do some paired work? Okay. And that really, with that, I'm going to close and say thank you to DLC for giving us this opportunity. It's been really fun and fully engaged. And I feel like we're going to be sending a couple of people into the world with much stronger skills in strategic influencing in an ethical way. So thank you, guys.